Hello and welcome to our webinar, The Human Face of the Migration Crisis, a faith-based response, sponsored by New City Press, Living City Magazine, the Society of the Divine Word, and Catholic Theological Union. My name is Suzanne Jansen. I am the editor-in-chief of Living City. This webinar is part of the United World Week. In the 1990s, the United World Week started as an initiative of young people of the Focolare movement to create public opinion that world unity is possible. Each year, from May 1st to 7th, it is now a global laboratory and an expo of stories, actions, and initiatives that contribute to achieving fraternity, unity, and peace. This year's week has the motto, Dare to Care, proposing the paradigm of caring at the heart of our life as citizens. What does caring mean in regard to the topic of migration? We want to start with a brief video with the words of Pope Francis in 2017, a call to the world leaders to welcome migrants.
C'è un'indole del rifiuto che ci accomuna, che induce a non guardare al prossimo come ad un fratello da accogliere, ma a lasciarlo fuori dal nostro personale orizzonte di vita, a trasformarlo piuttosto in un corrente, in un suddito da dominare. Di fronte a quest'indole del rifiuto, radicata in ultima analisi nell'egoismo, e amplificata da demagogie populistiche, urge un cambio di atteggiamento per superare l'indifferenza e anteporre ai timori un generoso atteggiamento di accoglienza verso coloro che bussano alle nostre porte.
Now let me introduce today's panelists. Father vănThanh, Vietnamese refugee, arrived in the US in 1975. He grew up in the South and joined the Society of the Divine Word. He teaches at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago and just published his book, What Does the Bible Say About Strangers, Migrants and Refugees? Dannia, Orellana, and Aida Pena are sisters born in El Salvador. In the 1990s, threatened by the violence of the Civil War, the family fled to the United States. Both are now married and live with their families in San Antonio. Dannia works as an accounting manager and Aida in bilingual education. Sean Ryan and Monica Nugent are both studying at the University of Calgary in Canada. As an outgrowth of their Catholic faith, both are active in Dignity Inherent, a group working to raise awareness about human trafficking and Canada's laws on prostitution. Now I hand it over to Greg from New City Press for the first part of our webinar.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'm really from around the world. We had registrants from all over, from different backgrounds and perspectives. And that's really what we're going to try to do today, is to hear from people with a number of different backgrounds and perspectives, different experiences and insights. And so we're really looking forward to doing that. And we welcome your questions as we go along. If you have questions, we will have time built into the time towards the end to respond to at least some of those questions and to engage with your perspective. But for now, we're going to start with our panelists. And I'm going to ask you, vănThanh, if you could help us a bit. One of the things you do in your book and in your kind of in your research and teaching as a whole is to look at the issue of migration from a global perspective, that a lot of times we might think in whatever country or region we're in of just our particular piece of it. But one of the things you really do in the book, you say, today's migration makes up the greatest movement of people of all times. And so this global perspective, we thought we might ask you to give us some of that perspective as we begin.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone from across the globe. It is said that migration is as old as history. While migration is certainly not a new phenomenon, it is nonetheless a major crisis of our time. Every day, millions of people are on the move. Some travel for the purpose of tourism. Others do it for business. Many, however, migrate because of political, economic, and environmental reasons. As of today, there are about 272 million international migrants in the world. Migration is a global phenomenon that is growing in scope and complexity, affecting most countries, families, communities, and almost every aspect of modern life. So let me just briefly touch on three major factors that I consider major factors of migration today. First, war and conflict are major causes of migration around the world. At the end of 2019, some 45.7 million people were internally displaced due to armed conflict, extensive violence, or human rights violations. Over 40% of the internally displaced persons, known as IDPs, occur in three countries: Colombia, Syria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the continent of Africa, for instance, internal displacement poses a critical challenge. Africa has consistently been the region most affected by displacements associated with tribal wars over the past decades. Communal violence is a major trigger of displacement. South Sudan's civil war, for example, has uprooted millions of people from their homes since 2013, and hundreds of thousands have been killed. The situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is also alarming. Its ongoing conflict and tribal clashes have taken a massive human toll. 4.5 million people are internally displaced, more than any other country in Africa. 7.7 million face acute hunger. 8.5 million are in need of humanitarian assistance, and over 600,000 are refugees in surrounding countries. Yet, most people, many Christians, have heard almost nothing about it. Second, human trafficking is a universal problem. It is a scourge that exists across the entire globe. It is a horrific crime that hides in plain sight and causes immense suffering for countless victims who are often the most vulnerable among us. At the vulnerable age of 12, for example, Laura McDonald was picked out by a gang of men who befriended her, showered her with attention, and gained her trust. Manipulated and groomed, her life quickly spiraled out of control as the men trafficked her around the country, deliberately keeping her compliant with drink and drugs. Deeply disturbed and frightened about what the gang would do to her if she tried to break free. This modern day slave trade, I call it, is a threat to all nations and triggers all sorts of grave violations of human rights. It shatters families and communities, fuels organized crime, and undermines public health and security. Human trafficking is the second largest and fastest growing criminal industry in the world, with as many as 40 million individuals living in slavery-like conditions. Many megacities around the world harbor this illegal activity. Cities like Paris, London, Amsterdam, Tokyo, New York, San Francisco, just to name a few, are not immune to this problem and have been considered prime destinations for human trafficking due to their ports, airports, industry, and rising immigrant populations. Human trafficking is a huge business syndicate that is extremely lucrative. The International Labor Organization, known as ILO, estimated that in 2017, sex trafficking and labor trafficking generated approximately 152 billion US dollars. To put it into perspective, human trafficking almost matches the annual revenue of Starbucks, Nike, Facebook, and Disney combined. Third, the environment and natural disasters such as hurricanes, floods, famines, or earthquakes are major factors in human mobility. Throughout human history, migration and climate have always been connected. But in the modern era, the impact that humans have made on the environment is likely to force more people to resettle or migrate. Many natural disasters like droughts, hurricanes, floods, or earthquakes are more recurrent and attributed to the effects of climate change, which are now considered to be the key factor of forced migration. In Southeast Asia and the Pacific, most of the displacements were the results of tropical storms or monsoon rains. 4 countries accounted for more than 17 million new internal displacements due to disaster: India, the Philippines, Bangladesh, and China. This figure is said to be 3 times the number of displacements caused by conflict and violence. According to a report published in 2017, events prompted by climate change, such as drought and flooding, could account for up to 1.4 billion people. Imagine 1.4 billion people who are forced to migrate by the year 2060. The report also predicts that by the year 2100, 2 billion people, about 1/5 of the world's population, could become climate refugees due to rising ocean levels. The human impact on the environment is a major concern for the 21st century. These alarming predictions should be a wake-up call for all of us to address the global climate change crisis today, and that we ought to do something about it. We must act immediately because the planet, our only home, is in great danger. What, if anything, can the Bible possibly say to us about climate change, human trafficking, and other forms of migration? Well, the Bible actually has a lot to say and to teach us about the human face of the migration crisis today. The Bible is very favorable toward immigrants, for much of it was written by, for, and about strangers, migrants, and refugees. Abraham and Sarah were lifetime sojourners. Joseph was sold into slavery and became an important person in Egypt. Moses was a fugitive and refugee and became a liberator for his people. During the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities, many Israelites were exiled among becoming immigrants and refugees in a foreign land. Esther, for example, rose to the occasion, risking her own life to save her people from genocide. Jesus, too, was portrayed as a refugee and an itinerant preacher. The early disciples were also migrants who were dispersed due to persecution and war. Some voluntarily moved about throughout the Roman Empire for missionary purposes. The story of Priscilla and Aquila particularly demonstrated that migration and mission were closely intertwined. Most biblical authors portray foreigners in a very positive light. In fact, the theme of migration and the fair and hospitable treatment of migrants is at the heart of Israel's and the early Christians' understanding of God's identity as the one who is always with God's people. This should be enough for us to realize and call us to act, to take responsible for our actions. That's just a kind of brief overview of the book and the situation today. So I will encourage you, if you want to know more, how should Christians respond to this global crisis, I encourage you to read the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll look forward. We'll come back and hear a bit more. But your first point, in terms of the types of migration, you talked about the impact of war on global migration. And so we're actually going to ask Dannia and Aida are going to join us now because they are bringing the human face of exactly that type of challenge. And so we'd ask Dannia and Aida to share some of their story and also how faith communities played a role in your transition and even your ongoing life in our country now. So I'll hand it over to you two. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. So my name is Dannia Orellana.
And I'm Aida Pena, and we're sisters.
We were born in Salvador, and we met the folklore movement in 1983. We grew up with this ideal and participating in all the young children's meeting and all the folklore events. We were very close to both sides of our parents, the family, when we were growing up. That also brought us a lot of happiness in our lives. Our parents were both professionals, and as a family, we were fortunate to have opportunities that help us learn and grow, but we also encounter many difficult experiences, and Aida will share a little bit about it.
So we lived through a major earthquake in 1986, which really impacted our lives. I was 6 years old, Dannia was 8 years old, and the Civil War during our childhood as well. In November of 1989, we experienced a life-changing event. Bombs were the beginning of our interaction of the war in the capital city of El Salvador. One morning, there was a loud sound that shook our home. My brother and I walked for less than a block to see what was going on, being curious like always. We quickly found small children that were dismembered by the bomb that had exploded between two homes as they were playing. We ran back home and took shelter. The bombs and bullets began and continued throughout the days. After 1 week, our leftover food was scarce. One very vivid and unforgettable moment was seeing our mom slither her way down to a store about 50 meters from our house. I remember crying and crying, seeing her leave and praying that I would see her come back. The crossfire was so heavy. Voices could be heard in the distance of military and guerrillas, orders being given back and forth. A moment of pause in my childhood life. The seconds and minutes felt like forever. In the distance, I saw our mom crawling back, holding the box of cereal in her arm. The joy was indescribable. After a day, the country went silent and black. Guided by the silence of gunfire, our family decided to flee. Looking back at our bullet-shattered home, we left quietly in our car. We were stopped at every turn with rifles pointing to our heads, even though my parents were holding a white flag that symbolized peace. It was about a life or death moment. We needed to hurry before the curfews began at 6 p.m. That meant to continue the attacks. The streets were quiet and deserted. The need to run and survival was crucial. We finally made it out. Our father returned to the city of gunfire to rescue 5 or 6 of the consecrated Focolare members and bringing them to shelter into a Franciscan seminary. By this time, we stayed at our grandmother's house for a while with other Focolare members. This was a less dangerous city than where we lived, which was the capital. Another suffering moment was the day we were coming to the United States. Coming back from our grandparents' home, we noticed that the door was opened. Our home had been broken into, and it seemed as if many people who took all of our home and traveling belongings, it must have been many people. We were fortunate to find our passports laid out in the closet. Quickly, our aunts and uncles and grandparents got together to provide us with clothes to bring for that day coming to the United States. The Civil War had such an impact on our family and our migration to find a better and peaceful living condition. Going through the Civil War in El Salvador was a road of an unforeseen future for us. We prayed and left it in God's hands.
So being part of the Focolare movement, we have been part of the Focolare movement through our lives, has really shaped us who we are. Coming together with visas as a family, we continue facing roadblocks. We're now in a new country with new people, new language, new jobs, new schools, and no extended family. We were starting all over, united and strong. Within a week of arriving in Los Angeles in 1991, we were excited to look for and quickly found the Focolare Movement House. We were welcomed with open arms, just as long-lost family members. The language differences were no barriers. The warm feeling of being accepted and loved was beautiful. We participated in many events as children, even though we didn't have much. One example was the transportation. The Focolare members will kindly give us rides constantly to and from events. It was wonderful for us to witness this unconditional love found in our Focolare family.
Yes. Currently, both my sister and I hold positions that we could have never imagined we would. Dannia is currently an accountant working in the mental health field, where she services the financial side of the company, as well as bringing warmth to experiences she hears about mental health. I have been working as an educator for 23 years now. I am currently the director of bilingual education in a wealthy district where the migrant population is very low. I'm in a place where beliefs and mindsets are very different than those of a poor district. I constantly dwell on the fact and find it difficult to believe that I am in this position, and I am so thankful for it. There are times that decisions that I need to make about servicing our immigrant students, learning the language, or problems that need to be solved. So for example, the constant reiterating to include our department's input in curriculum and instruction on best practices and linguistic strategies or accommodations which will serve our students best. But most of all, thinking of all students and their academic success. All of these major points discussed, mindsets begin shifting and believing to include our students. Many times, minds and hearts struggle to change and may not even be slightly shifted because of the current migration policies and past ones as well. The undocumented minor crisis events that are currently occurring has a lot to do with it as well. It is a constant, ongoing, loving situation, patience, and being brave. Sometimes it's a challenge for all of us to see life with new eyes every day. But what keeps us grounded and mindful is also due to the second chance of life we were given and the concrete love and care we have encountered. Seeing difficulties as learning opportunities has made us spiritually stronger. Our parents' vision of removing us from harm has geared us to work hard, to be there for others, and to encourage us further in the good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was so meaningful to hear and really connects so well to both themes of today, of the human face of the migration crisis and of how faith communities can respond. And so thank you for really opening up so much to us. And I'm wondering, vănThanh, as you were hearing that, and as I was thinking a little bit about your book and about the way that you talk about scripture and connect it to today, I wondered if there was any scripture story that, as you were hearing Aida and Dannia reflect, if it connected in some way for you, that you might have a response.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Dannia and Aida, for your testimonies, powerful testimonies of second chances, through tragedies, through simple acts of kindness from other people that gave you the second chance and become what we call successful stories in, through tragedies of war and violence and the effect of migration. God works in strange ways and in many situations. My book shows that there are many faces of people who go through experiences in the Bible, not just today like Aida or Dannia, or the story of Mariam, which I talked about when Boko Haram militants stormed into her house, a hometown in Nigeria. How she, being pregnant, dropped everything and ran for her life and tried to save her and her child. I talk about Fernando in the story in the same in Nigeria when gunfire broke out. This elderly man, African man, started to run and did not look back. And seeing her family and friends, killed and beside him. These stories of like Dannia and Aida or Mariam and Fernando are among the countless victims of and casualties of war and violence. Now, in northeast Nigeria, for example, the Boko Haram insurgency has forced more than 2.5 million people from their homes, and caused devastation for many lives. You think, what does the Bible say about these kind of situations or these types of faces that we're talking about? Well, the Bible has a lot to say. We always, shied of what the Bible speaks a lot about violence and destruction. And yes, underneath those stories of violence and casualties are these immigrants, are these migrants. The story, for example, and I talked about the Assyrian captivity in the 8th century BC, how thousands were taken to Assyria and Nineveh, or ran to the south to Judah for shelter. And then during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century, I talked about this devastation of being sieged and captured by the Babylonian Empire and their soldiers, and how they devastated the country of Israel, and how these stories underneath these are God's people who are dispersed. It's not about God promoting violence, how people create violence and destruction, causing, casualties of war. And interestingly, during the Babylonian exile, these Israelites who were exiled to Babylon rose to the occasion. And we see this is one of the most prolific time of Israel that the Bible really formulated and put together. People like Esther came to power. So people like Isaiah talk about, God coming in and rescue them. God would change everything, will give him a new day, give him comfort. You talk about Daniel, and then Ezekiel, and then much of the Old Testament books were formulated. Deuteronomy, on other writings were put together. These are successful stories of how, under different circumstances, God works through these circumstances and change. And then I talk about the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70, how Christians were dispersed, how Israel, many Jews were taking to Rome or to other parts of the world. This be known as the Great Diaspora. The dispersion of the Jews and Christians as well, and how because of that Christianity expanded, and in a very short, brief time, the church will scatter all over their empire and grow in a very expand quickly in a very short distance, short period of time. So there are many stories that are connected, and my book does point out this. Just one story, just one good, successful story. I was just at a funeral of a son of a sponsor who sponsored my family in the Bayou of Louisiana. There were this tiny little 2-room house in the Bayou of Louisiana, sponsor 2 families, my family, which was 8, and then my uncle's family, who were 10. There were 21 of us in this tiny house. An act of kindness by this people, incredible kindness, has shaped and changed our life. And we were there as a testimony of how an act of kindness has changed us and changed so many people along the way. So there are much we can do. The Bible talks us about being peacemaker, being bridge builders. We all can do that. A small act of kindness can go a long way. And I talked about, in the Bible, any gestures of kindness to unknown strangers or migrants or immigrants, you never know. It could be, hosting angels unaware, and how those seeds of kindness never goes
Yes. And I'm thinking this might be a perfect moment to invite Sean and Monica in, because their story relates to something that you really amplified, vănThanh, which was human trafficking and the challenge of human trafficking, and also this idea of just that we, in our acts of kindness, right in our own lives, can begin to make a difference in this story, like we read in Scripture and living Scripture today. So we'd love to hear from Sean and Monica about their encounters in Canada and some of the work that you've been doing there, kind of living out your faith. So we're going to hand it over to them for now.
All right. Well, thanks, Greg. So good morning, everyone. We're happy to have this opportunity today to share our experience with you. My name is Sean, and I'm joined this morning by Monica, a member of our Canadian-based advocacy group, Dignity Inherent. We will introduce you to the mission and work of our group, our motivation, and then describe how our faith plays a role in what our organization does. So first of all, Dignity Inherent is a tight-knit group of Western Canadian university students who endeavor to raise awareness about the federal laws in Canada related to prostitution, an issue which has a strong connection to human trafficking. Initiated in the summer of 2020, Dignity Inherent began when several youth from British Columbia ran a successful project to educate their peers on the realities of prostitution in our country. Since then, it has grown to include young Catholics from several provinces who cooperate, organize, and reach out in order to create a solid and zealous band of youth who are not only informed about the laws regarding prostitution in Canada, but also recognize the importance of upholding the dignity of each person. The crew of Dignity Inherent has been active despite the restraints of the pandemic, proving resourceful by hosting multiple webinars and collaborating with other organizations, such as the Archdiocese of Vancouver and the Simon Fraser University Chaplaincy.
Our goal is to connect young adults like ourselves with those who are well educated on the subject matter and able to provide the specifics and insight necessary to bring about a positive change in our local area. In continuing with our mission, we hope that by becoming more informed, the events hosted will serve as a catalyst for our peers to gain an increase in compassion for the challenges and hardships facing their fellow brothers and sisters. Additionally, we aspire so that their newfound understanding will cultivate an enthusiasm to take initiative and action on this issue to help bring about a healthy transformation in our country. We see Dignity Inherent as being an organization that is uniquely suited to bring together the experts on the laws in Canada regarding the subject of prostitution, individuals who have experienced the reality of the sex trade, and young Canadians. In that sense, Dignity Inherent functions as a bridge between young adults and experts, enabling those experts to share their knowledge and experiences with a new audience.
In Canada, prostitution falls under a law called Bill C-36, entitled the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, which came into effect in June of 2014. This bill is based on the premise that prostitution is sexual exploitation which primarily targets women and young girls. Bill C-36 has 3 goals, these being to protect those who sell their own sexual services, protect communities and children from the harms of prostitution, and reduce the demand for prostitution. Similar laws in other countries have been shown to effectively achieve these goals. Since being passed in Canada, however, the law has not been fully implemented as it is written, and thus the full effectiveness of this legislation model has not been realized. Essentially, however, Bill C-36 creates the circumstances where it is now illegal to purchase sexual services, thereby criminalizing the buyer, but not the individual selling the services. This past March, a recent court challenge was filed against Bill C-36 with the goal of having it repealed and replaced with new legislation that our organization believes would be detrimental to those women and girls who are sexually exploited. That is why, as Dignity Inherent continues with our educational efforts, we are also looking to engage in more active forms of advocacy, such as letter writing campaigns, to ensure that political leaders in Canada are aware that the youth of their country have great concern for this issue.
So what about the specifics of what our group does? Well, our fundamental methodology is to create live events where information such as the statistics, situations, and possible models and solutions are shared by experts with young adults. In this way, we have run a number of webinars over the past months that have featured researchers, lawyers, and additional experts on the subject matter. As previously mentioned, our primary target is university students and other young adults. To make our events more impactful, we often keep our attendance numbers lower and individually invite our attendees. Through doing this, we believe that we can build a sense of solidarity and community so that participants feel a deeper sense of responsibility and call to action to become involved with this issue as a result of personal interaction with members of our group. Dignity Inherent has also recently gotten on social media, and in the near future, plans to develop this outlet as an effective educational resource as well as a platform for action. While we acknowledge ourselves to be relative novices on the specific details and circumstances surrounding prostitution and trafficking, we believe that by volunteering our passion and time to connect experts with our fellow young adults, we can do our part in working for the good of our fellow Canadians. Finally, we would like to conclude our presentation with discussing how Catholic faith has driven us to start this initiative. As the name of our group, Dignity Inherent expresses, we firmly believe that each person is created with inherent dignity as sons and daughters of God, formed in his image. Much of our values can be sourced from the passage of Genesis 1:27. God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. The primary goal of our group then is to advocate and fight for those whose dignity has been disregarded and compromised, whether it is taken through the avenue of prostitution or by human trafficking, because we believe in the dignity of all our brothers and sisters. We see prostitution as a direct violation of the goodness of the human person, since it degrades the individual as a tool to be used, exchanged, and sold, rather than a person to be seen, revered, and loved. Through our work, we hope to serve and champion the rights of those who are vulnerable in our country. In addition, we aim to foster a community of other young adults to help take a stand on this important issue, as we feel inspired to and responsible for as members of the Catholic faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean and Monica. And I think that really was the perfect timing to hear that story and to hear what you're doing, because you really tied it to scripture, as Father's been talking about, and to the real kind of crisis that's among us and what we can do on the ground, which is really a lot of what the whole purpose of United World Week is. And so thank you for sharing so much about what you're doing up north. We do want to take a moment. We really want to just mention that we have two co-sponsors. As Suzanne mentioned early on, the Divine Word, the Chicago province of the Divine Word, the religious order that Father vănThanh is a part of, which I believe is the largest religious missionary order in the Catholic Church, and so really is on the front lines of these challenges all around the world. And also the Catholic Theological Union that Father teaches at, that also has a scholarship, an international women's scholarship that goes to women from developing countries who want to gain education so they can go back to their countries and serve in Catholic ministries in these places of need around the world. And so we're going to have after this webinar is over, you'll receive an email that will give you a chance to respond and give towards that scholarship, but also a chance, as we've mentioned, vănThanh's book and other resources that we have in New City Press, we're going to be giving you a coupon code that if you use that at our website, we're going to be actually donating 20% of all the proceeds that we gain from sales from this event directly towards that scholarship fund. And so if you want to get Father's book on the refugee crisis or any other resources that you would find helpful at our website, we'll be sending you the link and some things about the coupon code that you can use over the next week. And there really kind of be a way to participate and take some action in these issues. But we also, I know some of you have already begun to put questions into the Q&A box. And so we're going to try to get to as many of those now as we can. And so I'm going to hand things over to Suzanne at this point to moderate that part of it. Thanks, Suzanne.
Yes, thank you. So several people were really impressed by the statistics and the report that vănThanh shared. So one question is to get access to that. And as a follow-up questions, what can we do to raise awareness for migrants in the US when so many people refuse to believe in statistics and facts?
Right. Oh, thank you very much for that question. And thank you, Suzanne, for taking the lead on this. Some of the statistics can readily be accessible either in this book, and because that book, wherever the statistics is mentioned, there's a footnote that you can go to, and it's really available on the internet, and it's updated through various organizations like the UN, the various organizations that keep up with the statistics on migration all across the globe, all different issues, internal, external, human trafficking, asylum seekers, climate change, and all that it's available, readily accessible, and you find that in the footnote. The book doesn't have a lot of footnotes, only footnotes that are needed, like the statistic that you want to keep up, because I wrote this book in exactly a year ago in June and July, at the time when the pandemic is really at the center, and so it's already a year old, but it's still pretty relevant to this day. So yeah, so it's available in the book. Just want to note the testimonies, and really grateful for the young testimonies of Monica and Sean. They're really testimonies of faith in action, and making aware. I'm really impressed with what you do, bringing about the dignity of the human person, particularly those involved in prostitution, such widespread issues across. And I didn't know that about Canada, and the work you do there up in Canada, and that should be promote and raise to awareness all over. And I think your points are important. Taking steps, the fundamental steps is be aware. Christians must be aware of these issues, how to do that to keep up with these issues, and not be, don't be be deceived by the myths of immigration myths and stereotypes promoted by the media, oftentimes erroneously, that most migrants or immigrants, illegal immigrants, come from through our border. And that's wrong. Most of the immigrants come through, or undocumented immigrants come through, like prostitutes, like human trafficking, through rightful licit means, like airports, like overstaying visas, and this syndicate are doing this legally and promoting a kind of a criminal activity, which are don't be deceived by the media that most illegal or undocumented immigrants cross through our borders in the South. praying is an important act through these issues. Praying help us be a call, and then through prayer calls us to action. And I think Sean mentioned very appropriately, advocate to these people, to the issues, and take action as much as like this young, and Monica and Shauna, great testimonies of young people aware of the situation, feeling called and respond to the issues, just as Jesus responded to Isaiah's call, proclaiming the good news to the poor, those who are in prison, those who are captive, set them free. That's our call too. That's what Jesus' really fundamental mission. Set those who are free and captive. The prophets talk much about, how important it is, let justice roll down like a water, call us to action, and all that fundamental issues of these crises that the prophets talk about. We must take action. We must promote justice and peace. We must be like, the widow in the parable, persistently challenging even people in authority to take action. Otherwise, God, if they don't do it, then give that person a blow. Even the parable talks about punching knocking and keep addressing the issues. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Here is another question that's addressed to Dannia and Aida. So somebody said, I was touched when you said how your experience of disruption, loss, and having to build a new life has made you grow as a person and in your faith. Have you had moments where your faith was dark, and how did your relationship with God develop on this journey?
One of the things that I would say most of all has been the foundation that we have gotten from being part of the Focolare movement. Constantly thinking of others, putting ourselves in others' shoes. So whenever we have faced difficulties, challenges, whenever we have felt like we are in those dark moments, we quickly go to the foundation. And number one, too, is prayer. The constant prayer that happens every single day of our lives, before we speak, before we say anything. And if there's any times that we are feeling down, or if there's any times that we have, we have any flashbacks of what we have gone through, coming to family, expressing what we feel, I think it's the number two, one of the most helpful ways that we can cope when we have faced challenges. But I would definitely say prayer really helps us calm our, anything that we might be feeling at that moment. So I'm not sure if I was able to answer the full question. How did your relationship with God develop in this journey? Again, Focolare movement, the constant prayer, the communication, very open communication. Whenever we're feeling that, emotional, psychological, mental anxiety, constantly speaking it out when others listen, just having dialogue with people that you trust, and others also start seeing the way you walk life, and then they want to be invited to be part of your life, and you start sharing, and it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling to be there for others, as well as you be here for us when we have struggled with all of these situations.
Dannia, would you like to add something?
I would second Aida. I think it's exactly the same thing. I think the foundation that my parents brought us into, they knew, for me, I go back to Phoenicia, especially, I guess the Focolare movement has a lot to do with us, with our daily life. For me, is doing the will of God the way we were taught, and that brings me back to to the moment, to today, to live the present. So it has to be part of a group, to be part of a church. To me, that's very important, and I think it keeps me up too.
Thank you. Now I have a question for Monica and Sean. How did you get experts to help you with your webinars and with your campaign? Are there professors of the university? And is there more a way that we can have a collaboration between academic and grassroots activism?
Yeah, absolutely. We were really fortunate when we started out with this group in that there was a lady that a number of us were connected with. And she reached out to us and said, there's another group who was looking for some young adults to work with. And that other group was already a group of experts connected to the Archdiocese of Vancouver, a team that deals with this kind of stuff. And from that first introduction, we've been working with them for the last few months to host a number of webinars, as we described in our presentation. So in terms of that first connection, like, we were lucky in that an opportunity was provided to work with some experts who were looking for young adults. But especially, like, anyone on a university campus has access to an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I think the big thing is just reaching out. It's all about the connections you build. We haven't, like, because we've already have such a broad base to draw on, we haven't had to do too much recruitment for new people, but we often get new experts through the connections we have. But even when it comes to the team members we have on our team, the other young adults, it's just been a matter of reaching out to people, asking them if they want to get involved, letting them, work with the team, learn more about the subject. So it's all about making relationships with other people and then going from there.
So, thank you. I don't know, Monica, if you want to add something, or shall we move on?
No, that's good.
Yes. Okay. Here's one question. I guess that's directed to everyone. For some people, migration is a trauma. And how can we help to deal with the emotional and psychological support?
Speaking from experience, if I may, I think allowing an opportunity to the person to share, and so be a listening ear is an essential aspect. Show an act of kindness, and those, simple acts, simple gestures of kindness can go a long way. And those who going through this drama, they need to process this issue, these issues. And I think one of the most important is to help them reconnect with their past or with the people they left behind. Now it's easier through Facebook, through media, through gadgets and computers and internet, and those are very helpful. By the way, these tools are important, but some people don't have that access. So being a very caring, considerate neighbor, those that are moving into your neighborhood, and show a gesture of kindness that those are very important, to help relieve these drama and traumatized experience.
Anyone else wants to add something?
One of the things that I would mention is whenever there's emotional and psychological, trauma, another way too is to be involved. When you are involved with, new events coming in, crises happening, you get grounded even more. So that's one of the, I guess, things that we can share with people that have struggled with trauma, to invite them to come and help. And they will, similar to what we have gone through, the more we help, the more our body, soul, and mind gets healed, because we get to see others' situations and experiences, sometimes be worse than ours. So it's good to invite others, especially in these current events that are happening. So then, therefore, we can alleviate their pain as well.
Thank you. Maybe this might be our last question because our time is always almost ending. So what can we do to counteract recent incidents of violence against Asian Americans?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to respond to these. What can we do? I mean, the situation is getting pretty alarming, you know, with the different incidents and the anti-Asian sentiment, particularly here in the U.S. I don't know about other parts of the world, and it's growing. You know, the statistics have shown that they're just these incidents are growing very rapidly. I think, I mean, recently I noticed at a friend's house, his daughter Tiffany. I was surprised. She was become very active. Went to rallies. You know, I didn't think she would do such a thing. And she went to rallies to raise the voices that Asians, you know, do exist, and we are. This is just uncalled for. This is a sentiment. Unfortunately, these types of xenophobic attitudes create the sentiments of against Asian, and it's due to this. I think, in part, they say the spread of the COVID-19 affecting you know people, and that's one of the major perhaps causes, blaming on a certain group of people and put them all together as one group and creating all these myths and this you know, building up this perpetuate this xenophobic and so, you know, taking action. Young people, I think, has a strong voice, and I was really impressed. They went not because of them being fearful or they need to raise. They're fearful for their grandparents, you know, for their parents, and they're doing it out of, you know, for protection of their own most vulnerable, you know, people. And so I think raising voices, I think that had led to the U.S. Senate voting, you know, pass legislation against this crimes of against Asians. I think that has done some good, and so we continue to raise our voice, not just toward Asians, but any group of people, and that they don't deserve this scapegoating and attacks and discrimination and so on. I think, you know, just speaking out on behalf of those who can't speak out, like your grandparents or your parents who can't speak up.
Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you for all your questions. We will make sure that in the follow-up email you will get links to some of the resources that we used. And now I hand it over to Greg.
Great. Yes. Thank you, everybody. We want to say a special thank you, of course, to the panelists for sharing of themselves, really, and of their stories and being vulnerable in that way. There will be a chance, if you have specific questions for the panelists, we will be sending an email that will have their email addresses. If you'd like to reach out to them personally, either to learn more or to maybe have them speak to one of your smaller groups or encounters, whatever it might be, feel free to reach out that way. I do want to emphasize the book because a couple of people asked in the Q&A box. The name of the book is What Does the Bible Say About Strangers, Migrants, and Refugees? The book really reaches to all the topics that we've discussed today, I think in a really, really helpful way and very readable. It's a part of the series that we're doing. What does the Bible say about different topics? And this one, I think, it's our newest book, and I think it's really, you know, really relevant to what we're facing in our country, and then, as we've said, really a global issue. But for now, I think we'll leave it there. Look for our email. It'll be coming here in the next couple hours. If you have friends that want to see the video that weren't able to be here, we'll have a link that you can share. And we'll be doing, you know, continuing to do webinars like this and this type of encounter throughout the year. So we'll keep in touch. But for now, we'll say thank you for being with us. Bye-bye.